Welcome back to the 77th online episode of Peacetime, hosted every Sunday morning by Peace Point with myself, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, live streaming from the IMC in Azusa, California. Last time you saw me, we looked at blessing number 35 on a mind invulnerable to life's ups and downs. With the Dhamma talk today, we'll continue on our journey through the 38 blessings to the second blessing in the final subsection, that is number 36 on sorrowlessness. So today's session will run to about an hour and 10 minutes, starting with a 20-minute talk on attachment and sorrow, then 35 minutes of meditation and 20 minutes on preventing or dealing with sorrow. If you cast your mic back to one of the questions viewers sent in back in the 13th blessing on cherishing one's spouse, you will remember that we heard about the importance of distinguishing between sensual and non-sensual love. Unhelpfully, the word love in English can be quite ambiguous, especially when in many religions it is important to distinguish between beneficial and destructive forms of love. In Christianity, for example, they go as far as to categorize love into 4 different types. In his 1960 book called The Four Loves, the British writer and theologian C.S. Lewis described, on one hand, a destructive love called eros, romantic love or need love, and on the other hand, 3 types of beneficial love, which he called gift love, comprising agape, unconditional love, philia, a friendship bond, and storge or familiar love. Buddhism also makes a distinction between destructive and beneficial love. It would always advocate the sort of love that sets you free rather than the eros or sensual love, which means that there is nothing wrong with unconditional love, friendship, or familial love. Similarly, in Buddhism, destructive and non-destructive love is defined by whether it leads to attachment. In Buddhism, non-sensual love, in other words, love without attachment, which doesn't require something in return, is usually equated with compassion or karuna, one of Buddhism's key virtues alongside wisdom and purity. Such love extends unconditionally with the expansion of the mind. Compassion is very different from grasping or love motivated by the ego. It breaks down the barriers between you and the rest of the world. For arahants, such love comes naturally. However, for those who are still unenlightened, the love we experience, although called by the same name, is usually possessive by nature. Possessive love is subject to the 3 universal characteristics and only reinforces our egoism. Worse still, however, possessive love has a painful withdrawal symptom called sorrow, which is the opposite of everything exemplified in this blessing. Because an arahant has no further possessive love, they experience freedom from sorrow. The quality of sorrowlessness is closely linked with virtues seen in the last few blessings. In blessing 33, we talked about 2 types of suffering, the inevitable and the miscellaneous or largely avoidable. In blessing 35, we already have been introduced to the unavoidable ups and downs of the world, where we can smooth out their effect on the mind by attaining arahantship, by recognizing the desirable and undesirable things of the world as subject to the 3 universal characteristics. Similarly, this blessing deals with making oneself invulnerable to mitigable suffering. But even though we personally still fall short of arahantship, I hope what I'm talking about today will provide some guidance about how to reduce potential sorrow in our lives as we move successfully closer to eradicating it completely. So we have already seen from blessing number 35 that sorrow or sokha is included as one of the categories of mitigable suffering. It is characterized as a suffering state of mind that is torn by dryness, where the mind feels dry and cracked like the soil during a drought. It's like a dried out leaf that has lost all its vitality and freshness. Sorrow arises when someone finds themselves in contact with an inescapable and undesirable situation, or where they experience loss of something desirable that they were relying upon for their happiness. Their life-changing circumstances leave them feeling burned out and helpless. One of the possible opposites of sorrow is being sorrowless, or in Pali asokha, which indicates that the mind is no longer vulnerable to sorrow. And that is the title of this blessing. So what causes sorrow? The problem of the untrained mind is it tends to pick up indiscriminately on all the negative aspects of perceptions coming to us through the senses. The mind refuses to stay still, but is constantly searching around for new perceptual stimulation. However, whatever sort of thing it finds, it will not stay with that thing for very long, but will move on searching for something new. If you listen to some pleasant music, after only a few minutes, you will get fed up and start looking around for something tasty to eat instead. Before you've eaten much, you think to yourself that you would rather lie down and take a sleep. Before you've been asleep for very long, you would rather go outside and take a walk. There's never any lasting satisfaction. There's only one type of sensation where the mind never gets bored, which is when it falls in love with something or someone. Such possessive love causes the mind to be fixated firmly with no further wandering. If it's a couple, then they become a nation of two, shutting out the rest of the world. Once the mind gets obsessed by possessive love, it can no longer break free. In such a state of mind, any day you don't get a glimpse of your heartthrob, you lose your appetite. But you'll recover it immediately if only you can just hear their voice over the phone or get a glimpse of their face. If they love you back, then you can keep a lid on the suffering. But what if your love is unrequited? Or what if they start out by loving you and later change their mind, or love someone else, or die? It's at this point that the mind will become so dry that it will feel like it will tear in two. Overcome by sorrow, you'd rather plug your ears and hear a love song. You'd rather stay home than go see the latest rom-com. Where you used to be so fascinated by a variety of new things, after having been kept away from your obsession, now you've lost your appetite for any stimulation. Sorrow is therefore like a withdrawal symptom from possessive love, according to the words of the Buddha in the Uraga Jataka, Piyato Jayate Soko, which translates as sorrow is caused by the things that are dear to us. So if anyone wants to live sorrowlessly in the world, they should avoid getting fixated on people and things. Only in this way will their life be bearable. Possessive love isn't just limited to romantic interest, it can refer to any clinginess or attachment, whether it be your house, your car, or your job. Anything to do with such attachments will come back to haunt you in spite of yourself. This is why an increasing number of the new generation just skip romantic drama in their lives altogether, in order to focus on their career or on their spiritual development. If you don't believe me, look at Emma John's latest book, Self-Contained Scenes from a Single Life. It's not easy though, and for many, the prospect of being left on the shelf is unbearable, along with their parents' wishes for grandchildren. When the Buddha spoke on the subject of attachments in the Udana, he said the more your attachments, the more will be your sorrow. He said if you love 100 attachments, you will have 100 measures of suffering. If you have 90 attachments, you'll have 90 measures of suffering. If you have 80 attachments, you will have 80 measures of suffering. If you have 70 attachments, you'll have 70 measures of suffering. If you have 60 attachments, you'll have 60 measures of suffering. If you have 50 attachments, you'll have 50 measures of suffering. If you have 40 attachments, you'll have 40 measures of suffering. If you have 30 attachments, you'll have 30 measures of suffering. If you have 20 attachments, you'll have 20 measures of suffering. If you have 10 attachments, you'll have 10 measures of suffering. If you have 5 attachments, you'll have 5 measures of suffering. If you have 4, 3, 2, or 1 attachment, you will have 4, 3, 2, or 1 measures of suffering. If you attach to nothing and no one, then you'll have no suffering about anything. Such a person will mitigate suffering and avoid later regrets about life. In fact, the existence of suffering, despair, and sorrow in the world is only brought about because of the attachment that we have for physical things. When there's no further physical thing that we attach to, be it our body, other people's bodies, pets, property, or wealth, there'll be no further suffering, despair, or sorrow for us. Whoever can put aside their attachment for such physical things will attain happiness in this world. Those who wish to evade sorrow in this world, would be better to avoid attachments to the physical things of this world altogether. In conclusion, the less your possessive love, the less your sorrow. If you have no possessive love, then you'll have no sorrow. The more your possessive love, the more your tears. The end of possessive love will be the end of tears. So on the subject of the pain of sorrow and the possibilities to go beyond it, before our meditation today, we have time for a quick story about a lady called Paṭācārā, who was the daughter of a rich man from Savatthi. She was very beautiful, and her parents hid her away from potential suitors. One day, in spite of her parents' efforts, she fell in love with a serving man and eloped with him to a village far away from Savatthi. In due course, she became pregnant. As her time for giving birth drew near, on several occasions she asked her husband's permission to return to her hometown to give birth, in accordance with the tradition of the time. However, her husband, fearing reprisal, discouraged her from going. Nonetheless, one day when her husband was away, Paṭācārā secretly set out for her hometown alone. Her husband managed to catch up with her on the way and pleaded in vain for her to return. Unfortunately, she went into labor right there and gave birth to a son in the forest. Carrying the newborn, she returned to the village with her husband. Not long afterwards, she became pregnant again, and made the same request of her husband with the same result as before. As the time for her accouchement drew close, she again went behind her husband's back and set out alone for her hometown, taking her son with her. Her husband pursued her and caught up with her on the way, but just then it started to rain heavily, and she went into labor again. The husband went to look for a sheltered place for her to give birth, but while he was clearing a little patch of land, he was bitten by a poisonous snake and died on the spot. Meanwhile, while Paṭācārā was waiting for his return, she gave birth to another son. Later, she searched for her husband and found him dead. Full of sorrow and blaming herself for the misfortune, she decided to take her chances with her parents. The river stood between her and Savatthi. Because it had rained incessantly all night, the river was so swollen it was not possible for her to cross the river carrying both children at once. She decided to leave the older boy on the near riverbank while crossing the river with her youngest, intending to make a second crossing with the older boy. While she was midstream on the way back, a hawk hovered over the baby, thinking it was regular prey. She yelled to try to scare away the hawk, but it carried the baby away regardless. While the elder boy heard his mother shouting from the middle of the river and thought she was calling him over, so he waded into the river after her and drowned in the strong current. So in a single day, Paṭācārā lost both her sons as well as her husband. She was bereft. Later, she met a man from Savatthi and hopefully asked after her parents. The man replied that due to the rainstorm in Savatthi the previous night, her parents' house had collapsed and crushed both of them together with her only brother. The whole family had already been cremated. On hearing this tragic news, Paṭācārā became completely unhinged. She no longer cared about her appearance and wandered the streets half naked, shrieking, "Woe is me!" Meanwhile, the Buddha was preaching at the Jetavana monastery and seeing Paṭācārā from a distance, willed her to join the congregation. The crowd, seeing her approach, tried to prevent the crazy woman from upsetting the sermon. However, the Buddha told them to make way for her. When Paṭācārā was close enough to hear the Buddha's voice, he told her to focus her mind and be calm. Only then did she recover her self-awareness. Realizing that she was inadequately dressed, she quickly knelt down before the Buddha. Someone gave her a piece of cloth to cover herself. Only then did she tell the Buddha the full story about how, in a single day, she had lost her children, husband, parents, and brother. The Buddha said to her, "Paṭācārā, do not fret. You have now arrived at a place of refuge. Just as you have shed tears for the loss of your sons, husband, mother, father, and brother, so too have you shed an amount of tears greater than the waters of the four great oceans over the course of countless lifetimes." The Buddha continued by teaching, "Paṭācārā, the waters of the four great oceans are minuscule compared to the amount of tears shed by any one person on account of the sorrows arising from those they have lost. My daughter, do not despair. Be mindful." On hearing the Buddha's discourse from the perspective of many lives, Paṭācārā's sorrow receded. The Buddha, knowing that Paṭācārā had been able to control her sorrow, elaborated, saying, "Paṭācārā, when one falls victim to death, neither one's sons, nor parents, nor close relations can protect one. One's kith and kin have no power to give protection. Knowing this lack of protection against death, the wise person restrained by morality should hasten to practice the noble path that leads to nirvana. On hearing this discourse, Paṭācārā realized the uncertainty and futility of existence and attained stream entry. Paṭācārā decided on the spot to become a Buddhist nun. Later, after her ordination, she was cleaning her feet with water from a bowl. As she poured the water for the first time, it flowed only a short distance before soaking away. When she poured the water for the second time, it went a little further before soaking away. The water she poured for the third time went the furthest before disappearing. As she looked at the successive flow and the disappearance of the water she had poured out, she realized, even so do mortals die, either in childhood, in middle age, or old age. The Buddha, recognizing remotely through his supranormal powers that Paṭācārā had reached this insight, sent forth his radiance and exhorted her, Paṭācārā, you are now on the right path, and you have the true perception of the aggregates of life. The life of one who does not perceive the impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and insubstantiality of the component things is worthless, even if they were to live 100 years. Soon after, Paṭācārā attained arahantship and was later praised by the Buddha as the foremost amongst the nuns for knowing the Vinaya. So now that we are a little more well-informed about the downside of attachment, let's see if we can extricate our own mind from future sorrow by settling ourselves down for 35 minutes of meditation, which today is a recent live recording of the track entitled Accumulating Inner Peace for Resilience in Life. If at this time you would like to find a comfortable sitting position for yourself as you listen to my guidance. So we start by closing our eyes very gently. Closing our eyes in the same way we'd close them to go to sleep. Not squeezing our eyes closed, but just letting our upper and lower eyelashes touch gently together. And to relax our body, we start by taking a few deep breaths to ourselves. Breathing in to the full extent of our lungs, and then breathing slowly and smoothly out again. Once again, we breathe the cool, refreshing air from around us. And when we breathe out, we may feel that we're letting go of any worries or concerns still lingering on our mind. Meditation is mostly about our mind, but to create the conditions that allow us to work effectively with the mind, we need to relax our body first of all. And the way we do this is by what's known as a body scan, which means scanning down through the whole of our body, relaxing each and every muscle as we go. So starting at our forehead, we relax any tension in the muscles there. Then we relax our eyebrows and our eyelids, checking once again that the way we've closed our eyes is as gentle as possible. We let the muscles of our face become soft. Relax our jaw, taking special care that we have not clenched our teeth together. Before moving on down to relax our neck and let our shoulders drop to their natural height. From there we relax our arms, our forearms,
and then our hands and fingers, so that our hands are resting only very gently in our lap. And then continuing on down, we relax the whole of our torso, our chest, trunk, and the muscles across our tummy, before moving on down to relax our legs, all the way to our feet and our toes, until there's no remaining part of our body with any sort of stress or tension anymore. If we do notice knots of tension remaining anywhere in our body, then we do our best to relax them as far as possible, almost to the point that our whole body seems to disappear or melt away into the atmosphere around us. And this will allow us to turn our attention inward to the feeling inside us, that sense of warmth and well-being and of inner space, something which by any other name we might call our state of mind. And even our mind needs a little bit of mood setting to ensure the success of the meditation ahead. The way to do that is to put aside any worries or concerns still weighing on your mind, any regrets from your past or plans for the future, to leave nothing but the present moment, leaving nothing but the here and now, while we bring our awareness back within the space of the body to a safe place, a safe haven for the mind that some people have described as being like a bunker that protects the mind. Because for as long as our mind is all located on the inside of us, it's somehow shielded against the impacts of the outside world. So inside ourselves we conjure up a sense of happiness and joy in the mind. And if those feelings don't come automatically to us, then you might cast your mind back to a time in your life when you did feel truly happy, thinking not so much about the place or the situation, but more about the feeling itself that it brought you on the inside. That warm, fuzzy feeling. And you can conjure up the same feeling within yourself now, almost as if it were tiny particles of happiness and joy growing and spreading inside yourself until it fills up the whole of your body and mind, leaving no space inside yourself for any other sort of thought. And when you feel relaxed and refreshed, both in body and in mind, very gently and using no effort at all, you can imagine that inside your body is just an empty space, like a hollow cavity with no organs or tissues, no muscles or bones, or as if your whole body has been transformed into a sort of transparent bubble with nothing on the inside. And within this empty space of our body and mind, we can call to mind a picture of something like a bright, shining sun, or alternatively a full moon, a star, or perhaps a sparkling diamond. But this time we are relocating that imaginary picture to bring it within the space of our own body. We don't worry too much if the actual picture is not very clear. Even if it's vague, we accept it anyway. And we should bear in mind that for about half the people who meditate, it's going to be more of a feeling than a picture. In which case we can guide that object down within the space of our body by how it feels, the warmth or the shape and texture of the object. In any case, we bring the object slowly downwards within the space of our body, almost as if we were slowly breathing the object down to the deepest point of our breath, or as if we were gently swallowing the object down within ourselves to reach the very deepest point of our stomach. And once it reaches that point, or a point that feels comfortable for us, down inside ourselves, all we have to do is gently maintain the inner object at the center of ourselves, as continuously as we can, for as long as we can, not letting our attention slip away anywhere else if we can help it. If we do find our attention wandering away, then it's not the end of the world. We just bring our attention back again to the inner object. And if the inner object disappears, then we can just think of a new one. As for the possible problem of there being thoughts in the mind, if the thoughts are at a low level, then often we can just ignore those thoughts. Treat them like unwanted guests, to the point that they will eventually die down into silence all by themselves. Almost like guests that might go away if you starve them of attention. They will eventually go away all by themselves, even without a confrontation. But if you're one of those people who tends to have a lot of thoughts in the mind, then it may be the case that you need to make use of the traditional mantra, hearing the sound of the words Samma Arahang, or your own equivalent, not saying the words out loud, but hearing them silently coming up from the center of your body, as if that were the source of the sound. In other words, the same place that you see or feel the inner object. So we hear the words Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, Samma Arahang, over and over again, lightly, gently, continuously, leading the mind deeper at the center of the body, while at the same time freeing the mind of any extraneous thoughts, until the mind comes closer and closer to an approximation of silence within. In the beginning it may seem that there are a lot of thoughts, with very few gaps in between. As time goes on in the meditation, the gaps will become longer, until the thoughts are less numerous than the gaps themselves. And you'll start to discern a sense of connection between your mind and the center of yourself. As some people observe in their meditation, if they apply the mind only very gently, not trying to force anything, not trying to hurry anything along, observing with a very light and gentle attention. It may be possible for the inner object to start to change and transform on its own, in which case you just follow the inner experience. Follow the way it evolves without interfering, without changing it back to what it was before, always focusing at the center of whatever you see or feel within yourself. And the byproduct of that inner transformation will be a mind that gradually becomes calmer, that will gradually shed a negativity, giving rise to a sense of inner knowledge, a sense of mastery, a sense of clarity from within, which seems to cleanse us from the inside. And these changes for the good will stay with us long after the meditation itself. So for now, we focus gently at the center of ourselves, focusing with the same lightness of a feather floating down to touch on the surface of some water, with the same care that we might use to thread a needle. In other words, no hurry, no force, just a sense of lightness that will be rewarded with an increasing sense of joy from within. So we continue in this way just for a few more moments now in silence until we come to the appropriate time. that if your mind wanders off onto other things, each time you realize, simply bring your attention back again to the center of the body as before. Whether it's 100 times or 1,000 times your mind wanders off, just keep on bringing it back each time, and you'll start to notice that from spending more time wandering, and it spends in place, little by little your mind will start to become settled more than it wanders. And a feeling will build up of being connected with the center of your body. If the inner object disappears, you can think of a new one. If it changes, just follow it in its new form, always at the center of whatever you see or feel. And with meditation, practice makes perfect. It's always something that we need to work at, just as we might work at a new language or a new sporting skill. The things that we do regularly become things that we become adept at. For some things like physical exercise, 2 or 3 times a week will be enough to keep you fit. But for meditation, a little each day is mostly what we would consider ideal as a way to move forward in our meditation practice. If we practice a little each day, before long we'll start to see some improvement in the ease with which we can meditate. We find that we're able to go further in the same length of time, or achieve a greater sense of peace. There'll be a gradual accumulation of peacefulness within ourselves, especially toward the end of the practice. There'll be a sense of well-being that builds up inside ourselves, a sense of calm that seems to be fostered within the mind. And it'll be a sense of calm that stays with us. Even as we get up from our meditation to do other things, we'll still feel calm from our meditation, as if it's something that we carry around with us. When we're new to meditation, sometimes the sense of calm will wear off after a while, especially when we come across things in our lives that are irritating or annoying to us. But as we become more adept in meditation, the sense of calm will become more robust, more resilient, and it will stay with us in spite of the challenges we encounter in life, until eventually there will be a seamless connection both inside and outside of our meditation practice. When we've got our eyes closed, sitting on our meditation mat, then that would be called meditation proper. When we've got our eyes open, doing other things, maintaining that sense of calm is known as mindfulness. So meditation and mindfulness, hand in hand, can help us maintain a sense of well-being throughout our day, which is really what we're aiming for. So for now we continue to keep our mind on track at the center of ourselves, lightly and gently, using only the very lightest of touch to keep the mind in place. Each to our own practice, just for a few more moments in silence until we come to the appropriate time.
Sappha Buddhanupavena, Sappha Dhammanupavena, Sappha Saṅghānupavena, Sattha Soti, Bhavantu Te. So if you'd like to come to the end of your meditation for today, you can gradually open your eyes again. If you feel at all uncomfortable, then slowly try changing to a more comfortable position before gradually finishing your practice. So to come gently back to our subject matter of dealing with sorrow today, I should mention that it is a subject that I more usually reserve for eulogies and funeral homilies. So if you want to look up some of my funeral homilies on YouTube, you will find that there are more than a dozen different talks. Even without mentioning funerals, though, back in Lesson 10, we did flag up the special care needed when speaking to people in the throes of depression. For depression, of course, no specific cause is visible. Whereas, at least for sorrow, we are often aware of the specific thing that we are missing or grieving. Losing something we have previously been attached to can be one of the most difficult experiences any person faces in their life. Coping with sorrow may seem like a difficult task, and overcoming that sorrow may seem impossible. Confronted by sorrow, an important factor is the expectation of healing. Instead of focusing on how to overcome sorrow, a better approach is considering how to incorporate the awareness of sorrow into your life story and do the counterintuitive thing of treating sorrow like a gift that has the potential to open our eyes to the important aspects of life and using the intense pain to bring us back to our core values. There are 6 practical ways of doing this, namely to be glad for what we have had rather than be sad about losing it, acknowledging our feelings, understanding sorrow's unpredictability, reaching out to others dealing with loss, getting support, and accepting our new reality. The first way to cope when dealing head-on with sorrow is, rather than crying because our time with whatever we had is over, smile instead because it happened. When we considered what we have learned from a loved one we have lost, it sometimes only becomes apparent much later in life just how much knowledge and personal good habits we have absorbed from our relationship with that loved one. No simple practical skills, but emotional strength and attitudes, the base of your fortitude, and possibly the important foundations of your personality. Although this only underlines our sense of loss, especially when we have lost someone or something unexpectedly or unannounced. If we can continue to perpetuate that goodness, it keeps alive the example bequeathed to us by them. The second way to cope when dealing head-on with sorrow is to acknowledge our feelings. Sorrow can be such a painful experience that sometimes people actively deny their feelings, at least in public, in the hope of sparing themselves discomfort. When it comes to sorrow, denial and avoidance does not work, because pain just waits for you to face up to it later down the road. Emotions relating to sorrow can vary widely, and your feelings may be mercurial, so do your best to realize that this is normal. Acknowledge your feelings, not only to yourself but to others you trust, whether it be sadness, guilt, anger, or remorse. It's also not uncommon for feelings of relief to emerge, particularly if your parting signaled the end of a period of suffering. Acknowledging and expressing the emotions is considered a healthy way to navigate the sorrow process. If your loss is part of a conversation, others are likely to share their feelings too, which can help facilitate their healing as well as your own. Third way to cope when dealing head-on with sorrow is to try to recognize that sorrow is unpredictable. Sometimes it can leave you with the unnerving and terrifying feeling of being completely out of control. The unpredictability of processing sorrow is totally normal. You may find tears coming to you at unexpected times. Strong feelings can suddenly pop up, seemingly from nowhere, and hijack you just when you thought you were getting over it. Ironically, the more you try to avoid feelings or maintain control, the more difficult it will be to recover from the sorrow. Remember, there is no time frame by which you should be over it or to have snapped out of the sorrow. And that sorrow is individual and unique to the person experiencing it. A fourth way to cope when dealing head-on with sorrow is to reach out to others dealing with loss. Rather than being around those who don't generally understand your feelings, who can offer you nothing more than the words "sorry for your loss," it might be more helpful to find safety numbers with people who have similar first-hand experiences as you. Such just being able to sit with others who are going through the same emotions of sorrow and loss, or conversing with them, offers a sense of normalcy that otherwise is hard to come by. The feeling of connection with others who are grieving can offer hope and solace. A fifth way to cope when dealing head-on with sorrow is to seek out support, whether it be from friends, family, sorrow support groups, counselors, or online support options. These resources commonly offer sorrow support to people of all ages, but the most important step is to have the courage to reach out and ask, because, unfortunately, those able to help you are probably not mind readers. You need to let others know that you're struggling by reaching out to someone you trust. The sixth and final way to cope when dealing head-on with sorrow is to try to accept your new reality. Acceptance is said to be one of the final stages of grieving, so when sorrow is still new to you, it may feel impossible that you could ever make it to a place where what you're feeling can become normal. As you navigate this new reality that includes loss and sorrow, you may eventually develop a sense of meaning around your loss, or a recognition that this sorrow experience has changed you in a profound but nonetheless positive way. If you can accept your new reality, sorrow can manifest in different ways that feel more like a blessing than you could have imagined. In the meantime, be patient with yourself, your emotions, and your healing process. Remember that your healing is part of the gift of sorrow, and it honors whatever or whoever you have lost. It's not a betrayal to move past the loss, but a natural, healthy part of the process. The good news at this point in the blessings is that for those who have already attained nirvana, in other words, those who already attained the Dhammakaya Arahant, the mind will be insulated from sorrow. For those who have attained the Dhammakaya Gotrapool, for as long as they can maintain their mindfulness, they will not experience sorrow. However, for those with such a attainment, it's hard to keep the mind immersed in nirvana 24 hours a day. There will be times when their mindfulness is distracted and sorrow will be able to slip through. It's only the Arahant who is completely sheltered from sorrow. For the non-returner, once-returner, or stream enterer, the protection will not be continuous. Sorrowlessness lasts only for as long as full mindfulness can be maintained. Strictly speaking, on the subject of sorrowlessness, there's not much left to say in this blessing. It is a result that arises as a result of coming to an end of defilements. However, for those of you who are not yet Arahants, there is still much to be learned from the sorrowlessness, because if we are savvy, we can reduce our exposure to sorrow for the things for which we already have attachments, and we can prevent entangling ourselves with potential sorrow for things which we have not yet formed attachments to. Even without transcendental attainments at your disposal, there is still a game plan to help diminish liability to sorrow. As we saw in the previous blessing, we cannot escape the ups and downs of life, but since sorrow is one of our responses to these things, it is something we can have some control over. So rather than pinning all our hopes on happiness from romance, 4 broad headings coming from Buddhist sources help us discover the true meaning of love, namely by distinguishing between true and possessive love, engaging in self-care, loving ourselves truly by doing the maximum of good deeds, and practicing mindfulness of death. The first way is to distinguish between possessive love and true love, and cultivating true love at the expense of possessive love. This doesn't mean lacking appreciation for likable things or people, but we shouldn't let that liking become clingy or needy. The surest way to know that love has started to become clingy is that it pulls the focus of our mind further and further away from the center of the body. Second way to minimize exposure to sorrow is to engage in self-care. This is not an invitation to egoism, but instead of spending our whole time obsessing about other people, we may realize that we are also due for some TLC. One part of the Buddhist scripture called the Samyutta Nikaya gives the account of Queen Malika, who was the favorite of King Sanati of Kosala. Especially for the wisdom she always offered readily. One day the king asked Queen Malika the loaded question, "Who do you love the most in the world?" Of course, he wanted the queen to answer that she loved the king best. After a great deal of deliberation, the queen answered truthfully, "I've been thinking about your question, and you observe that all the animals in the world have survival instincts, and I think I'm no different." So the Buddhist equivalent of securing your own oxygen mask before assisting others would be 4 opportunities for self-care. And I should point out that you don't need to wait for your plane to go into figurative freefall before you start to take them seriously. The first area for self-care is to notice your own needs. It might mean getting adequate sleep, attending your physical health, or connecting with friends, all things that you will find helpful to keep your awareness on track during times of sorrow. It may mean saying no to extra responsibilities or obligations for a while. Since sorrow can be exhausting, you need to protect your energy until you start to feel better. And this shouldn't be considered selfish, self-absorbed, or greedy, but self-compassion that honors your own health and wellness as you recover from a major loss. Second area of self-care is taking extra care about the things that you eat or drink. An important part of self-care is to keep eating, but not too much, not too little, avoiding alcohol, and keeping it healthy rather than indulging in comfort food. Sometimes depression, anxiety, and physical symptoms of sorrow can result in worsened diet and decreased ability to eat normally. But despite the physical and emotional demands, it becomes especially crucial to consume a healthy diet. Remember that making drastic dietary changes during a period of sorrow might not be the best idea, so it's probably best to keep your usual eating patterns while incorporating healthy eating. A third area of self-care is making more effort to take exercise. Exercise and sorrow are a good combination because of the natural boost that exercise offers to your body and mind, because exercise releases endorphins in the brain that create feelings of well-being. Exercise is one of the few aspects of self-care that can make a positive impact on depression, so it may be helpful to have simple exercise as part of your daily routine, or join an exercise class where you can meet other people and focus on a common activity. Exercise will not cure sorrow, but it is a healthy method to take your mind off difficult emotions when they arise. A fourth area of self-care is to have more patience with yourself, especially as you experience the full range of emotions that come with the sorrow. You may have times in which you wonder whether you will ever feel fine again. Sit with those moments and trust yourself to heal, which is sure to happen given time. But be gentle with yourself and listen to what your mind, body, and spirit are asking for. Often we hold ourselves to a different standard than we do for other people. And it's sometimes you have to ask yourself how you would treat a friend who is in sorrow and give yourself the same kind of love, kindness, compassion, and patience that you would offer to that friend. A third way to minimize your exposure to sorrow is to love yourself truly through the goodness you do, which goes beyond mere self-care and could be referred to as truly loving yourself. This might be expressed through cultivating right effort, succumbing to unwholesome habits which you've never done before, overcoming any unwholesome habits you already possess, developing good habits that you never had before, and maintaining the good habits you already have. If you're a person who already meditates a lot, then you'll be a lot less likely to get bogged down in clinginess and attachment. If you are not yet established in the 5 precepts, then you should keep them strictly in order to protect yourself from antisocial behaviors coming from your neediness. Moreover, if you can keep the 8 precepts, you will be able to start to throw off the roots of the ties that bind you to clinginess and attachment. And some might say that life a monk or long 8 precept retreats help us to find internal sources for our happiness instead of fixating on external ones. A final way to minimize your exposure to sorrow is to recollect death and cultivate mindfulness of the deterioration of the body. Without being unnecessarily morbid, Getting used to the idea of physical death and deterioration will gradually reduce the tendency for the mind to crave sensual stimulation. If you practice the recollection of death habitually, it will help you in your practice of meditation because it will stop your mind straying from the body. It will allow you to escape from the trap of the senses. If you were to ask the Buddhist logic behind organizing funerals rather than getting together to express sorrow, it is an opportunity for the participants to recollect the implications of death for themselves. Instead of being sorry for the deceased, it is a reminder that we will soon be following close on their heels, and we need to make peace with our lives before our time comes. With the help of these 4 practices, even though you are not yet an arahant, your mind will be better centered within the body and less easily taken hostage by things that eventually lead to sorrow. So, to finish off with today, let's remind ourselves that sorrow can happen even to the great and good who have attained the stages of Buddhist sainthood. Lady Visākhā, who was the most prominent female supporter of the Buddha, had been a stream enterer or Sotapanna since the age of 7. As a stream enterer, she had attained the Dhammakaya and had seen the 4 Noble Truths in the physical body, but had not yet seen them in the angelic body or any of the more subtle ones. Her attainment, as with all stream enterers, was to have uprooted 3 of the fetters, namely false view of individuality or Sakkaya Ditthi, doubt or Vicikicca, and belief in rites and rituals or Sila Bhatta Paramasa. Nonetheless, there are another 7 forms of subtle defilements, including sense desire or Gamaraka, still remaining in her mind that had not been uprooted. Since Visākhā was a married woman with 10 sons and 10 daughters, eventually she ended up with a lot of grandchildren, all of whom were very dear to her. One day, her favorite granddaughter called Sudatta died. Even as a stream enterer, she forgot herself and went crying to the Buddha. The Buddha asked, Visākhā, you once wished your children and grandchildren to fill the whole of Savatthi, didn't you? Visākhā confirmed what the Buddha had said was true. And the Buddha continued by asking, do you know how many people each day die in the city of Savatthi? With a good general knowledge of her town, Visākhā replied, some days as many as 10 people die, but at least 1 person dies each day in Savatthi. The Buddha continued, with so much death each day in Savatthi, isn't it better to save your tears, otherwise you'll be crying every day. In this world, whatever grief or sorrow or sadness there may be, exists because we hold on to something too tightly. The only people who are truly happy, the only people who are free from grief, are those who do not try to hold anything too tightly. If you wish to be free from grief and free from passion, you must hold nothing dear that is on this earth. With the help of the Buddha's reminder, Visākhā realized that the more attachment you have for your loved ones, the more tears you will have to shed if you happen to outlive them. So this session I have introduced to you Blessing 36 on a mind free from sorrow. So for my next live session online, which will, fingers crossed, be a week on Sunday morning, we'll move on to the penultimate blessing, number 37, on freedom from subtle defilements. For good measure, I'd like to remind viewers that you can email your questions about meditation or what you've heard in the lecture to the email address that you can see spelled out in the slide, and I'll do my best to answer these on my next session. In the meantime, try to avoid recklessness or complacency as we continue to deal with the knock-on health and economic effects of the pandemic. Maintain a positive mood, speak only positive words, forgive others, extend good wishes to others, and meditate daily. Hopefully, as a result of today's session, you'll feel a little more insulated from the effects of sorrow in your life. So for today, this is me, Phra Nicholas Thanissaro, signing off for now. So long, folks, and stay safe.